Sloane Matthews squinted through the rain-lashed windshield of her pickup truck, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The sudden desert storm had transformed the dirt road into a treacherous river of mud, forcing her to crawl along at a snail's pace. The Mojave wasn't supposed to rain like this, not in sheets that turned the world into a grey blur, not with drops that hammered the roof like bullets. Yet it was the circling shadows above that made her pulse quicken. 5, maybe 6 vultures wheeled through the stormy sky, their dark silhouettes dipping lower with each pass. Vultures didn't fly in storms unless something was worth the risk, something vulnerable. "What are you guys after?" she murmured, easing her foot off the gas as she tracked their movement. The birds had begun to land in a patch of scrubby brush about 50 yards from the road. One after another, they folded their massive wings and hopped forward, necks extending with predatory focus. Sloane pulled over, the truck's tires sinking into the soggy earth. Instinct told her to drive on. This was nature at work, the desert's cleanup crew doing their job, but the same instinct had her reaching for her rain jacket. The downpour soaked her instantly as she stepped out, the earthy scent of wet desert filling her lungs. She trudged toward the gathered vultures, each step a battle against the sucking mud. As she drew closer, the largest bird turned its bare, wrinkled head toward her, eyes gleaming with irritation at the interruption. "Get back!" she shouted, waving her arms. The vulture opened its wings in warning, but didn't retreat. That's when Sloane saw what had drawn them. A foal lay collapsed in a shallow depression, its tan coat darkened by rain and mud. Fed couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, all spindly legs and oversized head. One of the vultures darted forward, its sharp beak tugging at the foal's hind leg. The tiny horse shuddered, but made no sound beyond a faint, rattling breath. "Hey!" Sloane lunged forward. The vultures reluctantly hopped back, wings mantling defensively. She dropped to her knees beside the foal. Its eyes were half-lidded, revealing a sliver of dull brown. Each breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, its sides barely rising. The poor thing was skin and bones beneath its wet coat, with scratches covering its flanks, evidence of a desperate struggle in the mud. Rain pounded Sloane's shoulders as she hovered her hands above the foal, suddenly uncertain. This was wild country, and she knew better than to interfere. The foal's mother might be nearby watching, or perhaps the herd had abandoned it, sensing weakness they couldn't afford. Nature had its own cruel efficiency. A vulture screeched impatiently behind her. The foal's eye rolled toward Sloane, a flicker of awareness in its gaze. Then its head lolled, too heavy to hold up any longer. Time was running out. "I can't just leave you here," Sloane whispered, her training battling with her heart. As a wildlife biologist for the Mojave Desert Preserve, she'd spent 5 years documenting the delicate balance of the ecosystem. She knew the rules better than most. Don't interfere, don't project human emotions onto animal behaviors, don't disrupt natural selection. She'd written papers on the importance of predator-prey relationships, lectured volunteers about why they couldn't rescue every jackrabbit with an injury. And yet, the foal's breath hitched, its ribcage shuddering with effort. Rain streamed down its nostrils. It wouldn't last another hour out here. "Damn it," she muttered, shrugging off her jacket. She wrapped the waterproof material around the foal's trembling body. Its skin felt cold even through her wet fingers. Gently, she slid her arms beneath its muddy frame, bracing herself for the weight. "Easy," she coaxed, as the foal flinched weakly. "Easy there." The vultures watched from a distance, shifting restlessly, unwilling to abandon their claim. One let out a guttural croak that sent a chill up Sloane's spine. With a grunt, she hoisted the foal against her chest. It weighed more than she expected, all awkward angles and dangling limbs. Its head rolled against her shoulder, warm breath faintly tickling her neck. The only sign it still clung to life. The trek back to the truck was torturous. Twice she nearly fell, her boots sliding in the mud. The rain had intensified, stinging her eyes and rendering the landscape a blur of grey and brown. By the time she reached the vehicle, her muscles screamed in protest. "Almost there," she panted, fumbling one-handed with the passenger door. She laid the foal across the back seat, quickly arranging her emergency blanket beneath it. Water pooled on the upholstery, but that was the least of her concerns. She climbed into the driver's seat, cranked up the heater, and turned to check on her passenger. The foal hadn't moved. Its eyes were closed now, its breathing so shallow she could barely detect it. "Stay with me," she urged, putting the truck in gear. The nearest vet was in Baker, at least 30 minutes away, and that was in good weather. Dr. Hernandez specialized in livestock and desert wildlife. If anyone could help, it would be her. As Sloane navigated the treacherous road, her mind raced through possibilities. The foal was likely from one of the small herds of feral horses that roamed the eastern Mojave. They were descended from ranch stock that had escaped or been released decades ago, adapting to the harsh desert conditions. But this one was so young. What had separated it from its mother? A flash flood, perhaps, or predators? A sudden jolt as the truck hit a pothole made her glance anxiously in the rearview mirror. The foal hadn't stirred. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "Just a bit longer." But as she watched, the foal's head lolled lifelessly to the side, its body slack against the seat. For one terrible moment, Sloane thought it was gone. "Elena!" Sloane called as she burst through the clinic doors, the foal cradled against her chest. "I need help." The small waiting room was empty except for a startled receptionist. The woman, Sloane didn't recognize her, jumped to her feet. "Dr. Hernandez," she called toward the back. "Emergency!" Elena Hernandez appeared within seconds, her dark eyes widening as she took in the scene. Without hesitation, she gestured toward an examination room. "In here, what happened?" "Found him surrounded by vultures," Sloane explained, gently laying the foal on the metal table. "So no sign of the mother. He's barely responsive." Dr. Hernandez's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, examining gums, assessing reflexes. Her expression grew increasingly grave. "Severe dehydration, malnourished, temperatures dangerously low," she reported. "How long was he out there?" "No idea. I just spotted him maybe 40 minutes ago." The vet inserted an IV line into the foal's thin leg. "We need to get fluids in him immediately, and he'll need a warming protocol." For the next hour, Sloane assisted as Dr. Hernandez worked to stabilize the foal. They dried his coat, administered medications, and set up heat lamps. Throughout it all, the little horse remained eerily still, offering neither resistance nor cooperation. "Will he make it?" Sloane finally asked. Eleanor's hesitation spoke volumes. "The next 24 hours are critical. Even if he stabilizes, he's very weak, Sloane. His chances aren't good." "What if I took him home? I could monitor him round the clock." The vet's eyebrows shot up. "That's not protocol, and you know it. He should be transferred to wildlife rehabilitation if he survives the night." "They're overwhelmed, and you know it," Sloane countered. "Besides, I've bottle-raised orphaned foals before. That summer at my uncle's ranch, remember?" Eleanor sighed. "This isn't a domestic foal, Sloane, and you're setting yourself up for heartbreak." "The odds—" "Just tell me what to do," Sloane interrupted. "Please." After detailed instructions and a car full of supplies, Sloane brought the foal home to her small ranch house on the outskirts of Baker. She converted her sunroom into a makeshift recovery area, warm, quiet, and easy to clean. The first night was the longest of her life. Every hour she checked the foal's temperature and tried to coax a few milliliters of special formula past his lips. Most dribbled right back out. His breathing remained shallow, his eyes unfocused when they opened at all. She named him Riven, for the circumstances that had torn him from his herd and the line between life and death he now straddled. "Come on, Riven," she whispered during the darkest hour of the night, cradling his head in her lap. "You've made it this far." But as dawn approached, Riven stopped accepting even the droplets of water she offered. His body grew unnaturally still in the nest of blankets, his eyes glazed and distant. A cold fear gripped Sloane's heart. "Please," she urged, stroking his neck. "I just fight a little longer." The foal didn't respond, his gaze fixed on something Sloane couldn't see. "Just one more try," Sloane coaxed, her voice hoarse from a sleepless night. The bottle's nipple pressed against Riven's mouth for what felt like the 100th time. Dawn had broken over the desert, bathing the sunroom in golden light that belied the desperate atmosphere within. Sloane had been up for 27 hours straight, and exhaustion blurred the edges of her vision. Riven's eyes fluttered, so briefly she almost missed it. Then, like a miracle, his lips parted, just enough for the tip of the nipple to slip inside. Sloane held her breath, a weak suckle, then another. "That's it," she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "That's it, brave boy." He managed only a tablespoon of formula before his strength gave out, but to Sloane it might as well have been a gallon. She reported the milestone to Dr. Hernandez, who cautioned against premature celebration, but couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. Over the next few days, each tiny victory felt monumental. The first time Riven lifted his head voluntarily. The morning he nickered softly when Sloane entered the room. The afternoon he managed to drink an entire bottle without stopping. But recovery wasn't a straight line. A week after his rescue, Riven's temperature spiked dramatically. Sloane rushed him back to the clinic at midnight, terrified she'd lose him to infection. Elena kept him overnight for IV antibiotics, and Sloane slept in her truck in the parking lot, unwilling to leave. "He's a fighter," Elena admitted when returning him the next day. "I wouldn't have bet on it, but he's proving me wrong." At the 2-week mark, Riven attempted to stand. His spindly legs trembled violently beneath him, buckling after only seconds. He tried again immediately, frustration evident in his snort when he collapsed. Sloane watched, her heart breaking at his determination. "You'll get there," she assured him. "One day at a time." She began physical therapy exercises, supporting his weight, while he practiced placing one foot in front of the other. Progress was agonizingly slow. Some days he seemed stronger, others he lacked the energy to try at all. Between her shifts at the preserve, Sloane devoted every minute to Riven's care. She'd postponed field research, called in favors for schedule changes, and survived on minimal sleep. Her colleague Marcus stopped by occasionally to help, watching her with growing concern. "You know he might never be fully sound, right?" he said gently one evening. Elena mentioned his x-rays showed some developmental issues, probably from malnutrition. "He doesn't need to win the Kentucky Derby," Sloane replied defensively. "He just needs a chance." On day 18, Riven managed to stand on his own for nearly a minute. His legs splayed awkwardly, but his eyes shone with a new alertness, taking in the room as if seeing it for the first time. Sloane recorded the moment, sending the video to Elena with a triumphant caption. That night, she moved a camping mattress into the sunroom. She'd been sleeping on the couch nearby, but something about Riven's newfound strength made her want to stay closer. She'd nearly drifted off when an unusual sound jerked her awake. A thud, then another. She sat up to find Riven attempting to walk on his own. Before she could intervene, his front legs crossed awkwardly, and he crashed to the floor with a startled whinny. "Whoa there, cowboy," Sloane said, rushing to Riven's side. "You're not quite ready for solo adventures." The fall had startled rather than hurt him. He blinked up at her, snorting indignantly, as if the floor had somehow betrayed him. Something about his expression, so affronted, so determined, made Sloane laugh for what felt like the first time in weeks. "We'll try again tomorrow," she promised, helping him back to his bedding. But Riven had crossed a threshold. Over the next week, his progress accelerated dramatically. He graduated from wobbly standing to uncertain steps, from hesitant exploration of the sunroom to curious investigations of the adjacent living room. His personality emerged more clearly, stubborn, intelligent, with an unexpected playfulness that surfaced in head tosses and sudden prancing movements. At the 1-month mark, Dr. Hernandez came for a house call, conducting a thorough examination, while Sloane anxiously hovered nearby. "His recovery is remarkable," Elena conceded, watching Riven trot unevenly across the living room. "But I need to be frank with you, Sloane, he'll never be fully sound." Sloane had suspected as much. One of Riven's hind legs remained weaker than the others, causing a permanent hitch in his gait, and though he'd gained weight, he remained smaller than he should be for his age. "What does that mean for his future?" she asked quietly. "He can't be released," Elena stated simply. "He wouldn't survive predators or keep up with a herd, and he'll need ongoing care, proper nutrition, regular veterinary checks, protected environment." The words hung between them, unspoken but clear. Sloane couldn't provide that indefinitely. Her small property wasn't equipped for a permanent equine resident, even one as small as Riven, and her career required regular field work, sometimes for extended periods. "I've been thinking," Elena continued carefully, "there's a sanctuary in Northern California, Wild Hearts. They specialize in horses with special needs. I know the director, Gabriela Torres. They do remarkable work." Sloane's throat tightened. "You think I should send him there?" "I think you saved his life," Elena said gently. "But loving something sometimes means recognizing when someone else can give it what it needs." That night after Eleanor left, Sloane sat on the floor beside Riven. He nuzzled her shoulder, leaving a damp spot on her shirt that she didn't bother to wipe away. The thought of parting with him carved a hollow space in her chest. Over the next day, she researched Wild Hearts obsessively. The sanctuary sprawled across 200 acres of rolling hills, with specialized facilities for rehabilitation and permanent care. Their social media showed horses grazing peacefully, receiving therapy, even bonding with other rescued animals. Their success stories included cases far more severe than Riven's. When she finally called Gabriela Torres, the woman's warm voice and thoughtful questions reassured her. Yes, they had space. Yes, Riven's case sounded like a good fit. Yes, Sloane could visit any time. "We believe rescued animals keep pieces of their humans' hearts," Gabriela said. "We honor those connections. The decision was both obvious and excruciating. Sloane scheduled the transfer for the following week, then set about preparing Riven for the journey. Each moment with him now felt precious, weighted with the knowledge of their upcoming separation. She took dozens of photos, recorded his distinctive nicker, and found herself memorizing the pattern of the whirl of hair between his eyes. The night before their departure, she slept beside him on the floor, one hand resting on his side, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath, so different from those first desperate days. In the darkness, she whispered to him about the sanctuary, about the life that awaited him, about how proud she was of his strength. When morning came, she wasn't sure which of them was less prepared to say goodbye. The drive to Wildheart Sanctuary took just over 6 hours. Riven traveled well, standing comfortably in the small trailer Sloane had borrowed from a neighboring rancher. They stopped twice for rest breaks, and each time Sloane found herself taking longer than necessary, postponing the moment of arrival. Northern California's landscape couldn't have been more different from the stark beauty of the Mojave. Rolling hills carpeted in green stretched toward the horizon, dotted with clusters of oak trees. The sanctuary itself was nestled in a gentle valley, marked by a simple wooden sign bearing a painted horse silhouette. Gabriela Torres met them at the entrance, a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that crinkled warmly at the corners. "You must be Sloane," she said, extending a weathered hand, "and this is our new friend." Riven peered cautiously from the trailer, nostrils flared as he scented the unfamiliar air. Sloane led him down the ramp, his good days of practice making the descent almost graceful despite his persistent limp. "He's gorgeous," Gabriela commented, keeping a respectful distance. "Desert-born, through and through." "He's a fighter," Sloane replied, her voice unexpectedly thick. Gabriela showed them to a spacious paddock with a 3-sided shelter, Riven's temporary home until he acclimated. Adjacent paddocks housed other horses who nickered curiously at the newcomer. One dappled mare pressed against the fence, stretching her neck toward Riven with particular interest. "That's Mariposa," Gabriela explained. "She's our unofficial welcoming committee. Lost a foal last year and tends to adopt newcomers." Sloane nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The moment of goodbye arrived too soon. She'd brought a few items: the blanket Riven had slept with, his favorite brush, a bag of the apple treats he'd recently discovered. "He likes to be scratched right behind his left ear," she told Gabriela, demonstrating. "And he's still learning to trust the world, so sudden movements can startle him. We'll take it slow," Gabriela promised, "and we'll send updates regularly." When there was nothing left to say, Sloane knelt before Riven one last time. His intelligent eyes met hers, somehow more knowing than she expected. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, resting her forehead briefly against his. "Better than okay." She straightened, stepped back and nodded to Gabriela, who opened the gate to the paddock. Riven hesitated at the threshold, one hoof raised. He looked back at Sloane, then forward at the open space before him. For a terrible moment, Sloane thought he might refuse to go, that he might make this even harder than it already was. Then, as if making a decision, he stepped forward, another step, and another. His uneven gait carried him into the center of the paddock, where he paused, surveying his new domain. Mariposa nickered from next door, and to Sloane's surprise, Riven answered with a clear, strong call of his own. When he turned back to look at her one final time, Sloane forced herself to smile through her tears. "Go on," she whispered. "You're free." Driving home alone, Sloane found the silence of the vehicle almost unbearable. She rolled down the windows, letting the warm air rush in, carrying the scents of grass and earth rather than the familiar desert dust. The sun was setting when she finally reached the outskirts of the Mojave, painting the sky in impossible shades of orange and pink. She pulled over at an overlook, needing a moment to transition back into her old life. In the distance, she spotted them, a group of vultures circling lazily against the darkening sky. Weeks ago, the sight would have filled her with dread. Now, she watched them with a newfound understanding. They weren't harbingers of death, but participants in the great cycle, nature's way of ensuring that nothing was wasted, that every ending served some purpose. What she'd done with Riven hadn't disrupted that cycle. It had simply created a branch in the river of possibility, a different kind of continuation. And while she might never see him again, she knew with certainty that the frail, dying foal surrounded by vultures had transformed into something remarkable, a living testament to resilience, to second chances. On the horizon, the vultures continued their eternal circle, dark silhouettes against the fading light. And somewhere, In a green valley far from the desert that birthed him, Riven was beginning a new chapter, his life a different kind of victory against the odds. Sloane started her truck and headed home, carrying the weight of absence, but also the lightness of having done something that mattered. Sometimes she realized the greatest act of love was simply creating the possibility of a future that might otherwise never have existed. My friends, we've reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you draw from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.